Hello, welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and later on our podcast channel. It's time for our weekly Monday show with myself, Andrew Musgrove, and Aaron Stokes. And I'm bringing you some good news. For the last few days, Aaron, we've had no drilling during the day, which means our podcast should go uninterrupted for the next hour.
I think you might. Let's hope you haven't just jinxed that now. So fingers crossed.
No, this has been a fantastic couple of days, starting with this brilliant news, and then tomorrow a win for Newcastle in that first leg of the League Cup semi-final. What a start to the week.
Yep, I mean, we can only dream.
Can't get much better than that. Well, it could have done, actually, let's be honest. We could be sitting here with Newcastle having all 3 points, having faced Crystal Palace down at Selhurst Park. And I've been thinking about how we address looking back on that game, because as usual, social media has been kind of a divide on how people have taken that point. Some people have taken it as a good point, some not so much. And I've been going back and forth in my mind, because Selhurst Park is this destination where the assumption is it's a horrible place to go. You know, Selhurst Park is a fortress, but when you look at their record, I think the last win was in October there. Yes, they drew against Manchester United, but, you know, they haven't had a great record of late. And I also think challenging for the top four, if this is this time next season, it's an 0-0 draw Crystal Palace with that sort of record, it's not such a good point. However, I can also see the argument. You go, well, let's remember where we were this time last year. They did just draw against Manchester United. Newcastle battered them. They just couldn't score. It's a difficult one. Where do you lie on that point?
I think if you'd said to me on Friday afternoon that they're going to come away from Crystal Palace with a draw, I wouldn't have been too disappointed. But I think the overall feeling on Saturday night when, the full-time whistle went was just that, disappointment. And I think that's because the manner of the game and how it played out. I think Newcastle played well. They had, significantly better chances. But I think it was one of those where they could have been there all night and I don't think they would have scored. And I think that's why it was so disappointing, because did Leicester maybe paper over the cracks in a sense that they had 0-0 at Arsenal, 0-0 at Leeds, and there was questions starting to be raised about, the attackers and being a bit toothless in front of goal. They went and, beat Leicester pretty comfortably with 2 second-half goals, and that was sort of forgotten about. But I'm not sure what it is at the moment. This team just aren't clicking going forward, and there's just something missing in the final third the last couple of games.
But is it a case that they're not clicking, or is it a case that they're just not being clinical enough? Because yesterday, against Crystal Palace on Saturday, 16 shots. Yes, they only had one on target, but they were getting into areas where on another day you would expect forwards to score. In fact, you would expect the forward to score. I know Isak had that header, which was tamely put into the arms of the keeper. There was a wonderful ball put across the middle of the box by Jacob Murphy, and Isak just wasn't there. It fell to St. Max when it was cleared for a corner. But in Newcastle side in a bit better form, you would say those chances end up in the back of the net. I guess the pessimist within would argue that this is now like the third, the fourth time that this has happened. How long can we go on saying, oh, the next game they will finish those chances? It's just an off day up front.
Yeah, maybe the phrase I used that it wasn't clicking in the final third maybe wasn't right. I think they did play some good stuff in the final third, as you say. They did create plenty of chances, but as I said, it was just one of those nights where you just knew in your heart of hearts that they weren't going to score. So I think the fact that there is factors to consider, and that is probably that Alexander Isak is still getting up to speed after his injury. There's factors that Callum Wilson still doesn't look like he's shaken off whatever illness sort of kept him out over the festive period, or he looks a yard off the pace all the time. And then obviously we go back to the fact that they're maybe lacking a little bit of quality off the bench as well to come on and make a difference. I know that obviously Isak and Maxi were both brought on to make a difference on Saturday night, but for whatever reason, it's not just working. And I think this clinical and confident and composed Newcastle that we saw in the first half of the season, where they were putting 4 past Villa and Brentford and Fulham, that Howe needs to work out how to get that sort of confidence back in the attacking players.
But what is the solution? Because again, you watched that game against Crystal Palace. They were on top, Newcastle. They dominated. They should have really gone back with all 3 points. They just couldn't take their chances. How, if you already have, what are you doing? I mean, are you doing what maybe like Ben suggests here? Do you mix it up a little bit? Do you start Max and Isak and try different personnel? Do you push in the transfer market and try and go out and get someone who can really come in and throw kind of a grenade into the dressing room and say, right, I'm here and I mean business? Or do you just back your players and go back to that point? Well, it's been a few dry games, but they will eventually put these chances into the back of the net.
I think Eddie Howe is probably leaning towards the third choice more than anything. I think he's, as ever, not belittling any players. He's not being negative about any players. He's, has full confidence that they will find their shooting boots. I'm a tad surprised that he didn't mix the team up a little bit on Saturday, given how many games they've had, the fact that they've got Southampton tomorrow. I thought maybe Saturday was the game to try something different. I think Maxi coming back in, yes, he hasn't maybe earned that recall, but the longer this Barron spell goes on, you sort of can't ignore that he does, provide that little bit extra in front of goal. So, look, it remains to be seen what business they're doing the last week. We know that obviously they're now chasing an attacker, given, Wood's sort of untimely exit, which, you hit the nail on the head, could, spark a couple of these attacking players into life. But I mean, you're looking at the likes of Callum Wilson. He should have had a rocket up there anyway because of Alexander Isak coming back. So, look, all clubs go through them, these barren and dry runs. And I don't think it's anything to be too concerned about. But I just think, coming away from Selhurst Park on Saturday, the overriding feeling was, okay, this has happened 3 or 4 times in January now. And if Newcastle really want to keep up with the pace of the runners and riders of the Premier League, they need to be beating teams like Palace and Leeds in this run-in.
Do you think if Isak was fully match fit, he would be in the starting 11 ahead of Callum Wilson, given the form Wilson's on?
It's difficult because we know how has his favourites. He doesn't like changing the team, and I mean, Maxi's case in point in that you really struggle to get back in this team when you're not fit. So I think if Isak does start hitting the goals in, it leaves Wilson a little bit vulnerable in the short. But it's hard to see what he does. I think he probably goes unchanged tomorrow at Southampton. Maybe 1 or 2 tweaks at the very most. And as I said, I was a bit surprised he didn't make those changes Saturday and then play your full strength team on Tuesday. But there's probably going to be a few tired bodies there, and obviously when it isn't clicking in a game like Saturday, you then got to go away, traveling down the bottom of the country again against a tricky opponent in a huge game of massive importance, and try and get it to click again. So, look, they could prove me all wrong by sticking 3 past Southampton tomorrow, but I just think that was the one worrying thing I saw on Saturday, was just how toothless they looked in up front.
They never gave up, and they were trying and trying. It just didn't come for them. You've mentioned there that you would go unchanged. John disagrees. He says, I think tomorrow I would be tempted to start Isak. He doesn't think Callum Wilson looks fit. He wants to see Joelinton in the midfield with Willock and Bruno and St. Maximo up top, which I assume means kind of over on the left. And there's a few comments here on that says they'd like to see Isak and St. Maximin brought into the starting 11 for that game against Crystal Palace.
Yeah, I mean, the calls for Maxi are growing for me. As I've said on this podcast the last couple of weeks, I've been absolutely fine with Willock and Joelinton occupying those sort of spaces down the left. I think Willock, again, had a very good game on Saturday night, and I was really surprised to see he was the one that made way in the second half for Maxi, given how poor of a game Almiron had, I thought. And I don't think Willock was too happy coming off, because I think he probably knows that he had a better game than most on Saturday. But Maxi is becoming harder to ignore, and I think the longer this run goes on of Newcastle failing to score in front of goal, the louder those calls will be for him to return. And as I said, and I'll say, do you want to be tinkering with your team in a semi-final? Probably not. Is it a risk of some sort to bring Maxi back? And what I will say on Wilson and Isak is they're both, not looking up to speed, but the only way you get them up to speed is playing them. So do you bring Isak in and then sacrifice Wilson's fitness even more? It's such a difficult decision. And, I don't envy Howe having to make it, but for me, I just think he sticks with Wilson for the semi. That's just my hunch at the moment.
Roger says Wilson break open then for Isaac. He's not too sure about Alan St. Maximin. Mark says Willock has been excellent for us. Wilson and Almiron had a bad game. Time to freshen it with Isaac and Maxi. And Wes says we try to pass the ball into the net far too much recently. Same against Leeds, Bournemouth, and Fulham. Not enough crosses getting put in for me. It's an interesting point because I had a look at the stats prior to coming on air here, and there were quite a few crosses put into the box. Kieran Trippier top on the list with his delivery. I think he had 10 accurate out of 16. But my question would be, how does that suit the likes of Wilson and Isak, the way Newcastle play? Because you get the ball in the box. I don't necessarily think those getting up and heading it is their main strength. For example, the two chances that did come against Palace, both headers and both wasted. I'm not really sure they've got the striker who can take huge advantage of decent deliveries into the box.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? Because at the start of the season, they had quite a lot of success with set pieces, and as you say, Trippier, just pummeling balls into the box. But the last couple of weeks, that seems to have dried up. I saw a lot of people on social media after Saturday calling for, something new for these corner routines, because they had so many corners at Selhurst Park, and you've got such a big defence going up for them all, and Newcastle just weren't making the most of it. As for putting crosses into the box, I think Newcastle look better going forward when they get into the byline and not trying to float the crosses in. Murphy, as you say, had a fantastic chance on Saturday, a fantastic ball in the box that wasn't capitalised on. So,
look, where was the striker for that? It's 1 point in it's pretty insignificant, I guess, but that's where your striker should be. It flashed straight across essentially the penalty spot, didn't it? And Isaac wasn't there to be seen. Where is your number 9? Where is your striker to put that at the back of the net?
I think I don't think he looks off the pace, but I think he's just missing that extra yard. I think and Alexander Isak with 5 or 6 or 7 games consecutively under his belt probably gets on the end of that, or is in the position to pounce on that. He's probably still learning how to work with this team. Yes, he's been at the club since August, but he's only actually played a handful of games. And I remember at St James's Park earlier this season when just taking a moment or two to watch him, he's trying to figure out how this team play. He's going to make a run, and then seeing that the players maybe just aren't on the same wavelength of them. So these things will come over time. It's important not to panic. I still think 4 points from the last 2 games is good, and there isn't anything to worry about. But it was just such a disappointment, given that Palace really offered very, very little, apart from obviously that one Mateta chance, which I'm sure we'll talk about later on. And the back four looked really solid again. It's a shame that the last couple of games, they've sort of been, the only negatives are coming at the opposite end of the pitch.
As Roger says, Isaac is still on 3 goals in 5 games. Eddie Howe held his press conference today, which is Monday morning, and he was asked about Alexander Isak, and he said, and I quote, "He hasn't had a lot of training time. We've had a lot of games, and between those, you can't train the players to the intensity you want. We've exposed them to the games, but at some stage, he will need the training load to get to his very best levels." So Eddie Howe is well aware that Isak isn't up to speed, and I guess it's fortunate he's come back at such a significant time for Newcastle United, but also a little bit unfortunate that you're not going to have a fully match fit Isak to use to your full advantage.
Definitely, and I think Howe's spot on with what he says. He probably has missed those really key training sessions, given that they've been playing, twice a week, sometimes three games in 10 days at times. It's been a really, really hectic schedule, and it must be hard for Howe to try and get him up to speed when you're trying to start him again in cup games or bringing him on and trying to work him and Wilson in this team. I still don't know going forward and long term what on earth he does with the two of them, because yes, Isak can play in the 10 or the out on the left or the right, but I think naturally he wants to be playing as a central striker, and I just can't see how changing that 4-3-3 system that he uses. But look, it'll come. It's still early days. Hopefully Wilson can find this form that he's been missing. I think this is his longest dry streak since he joined Newcastle in 2020, which obviously isn't good to see. But look, all it takes is one game, hopefully tomorrow night, for them to get back on track. Because it's vital that they do it. And somebody, Kieran here in the comment makes a point about relying on Miggy. It's a big period for Miggy coming up because he really set the league alight in the first half of the season. In the last couple of games, I feel like we're maybe starting to see the Miggy of old. I thought Saturday was a game where he just didn't have the same confidence or the same impact that we've been used to seeing him. So it falls on him as well, not just Isak and Wilson. Willock and Joel and those also need to be chipping him with goals as well.
Eddie Howe's reaction to the point at Selhurst Park, I thought was refreshing. Not in terms of we haven't heard it before because we know the standards that he sets, but just reading the quotes from him about the point, it's very satisfying to know that the manager has such high standards. So again, in his press conference, he was asked about going 15 games unbeaten, and he said, and I quote, "Really proud of the group for being as consistent as we have been. It takes one off day to end that, so to go 15 games is hugely satisfying. The disappointing thing is after Saturday, it didn't feel like that. It felt like a defeat. The expectations are so high internally and externally, and we're very motivated as a group, so we are disappointed with the result. We need to keep perspective at all times with how well the players are doing and make sure they don't feel any negativity going into tomorrow." Quite a mixture of words there. He's disappointed, which is negative, but he wants to protect the players from that negativity. I mean, getting that balance is quite difficult.
Yeah, and the overriding feeling on Saturday night, I certainly felt was one of disappointment. Yes, they've just extended this amazing record. How's the first English manager to do it in this century? It should have been a really cause for celebration, and it wasn't, just because of the manner of the game and how it played out. He's absolutely spot on what he says. For this group who have gone 15 games unbeaten in the toughest league in the world is a fantastic achievement. And the defence especially just have not switched off once in the last couple of games. I thought, Nick Pope showing that, he can go all game without having anything to do, and then pulling a save of that quality out the top drawer. So, look, it's all rosy and positive at the back. I don't have any, qualms or negatives to say about the back four or the back five. But, going forward, yes, it's fantastic remaining unbeaten, but Spurs and Liverpool and Brighton will eventually play catch up. And if Newcastle United aren't on the ball and firing in front of goal, it starts to become a bit of squeaky bum time in that race for the top four.
Transfer market wise, so we know Newcastle in the market for a midfielder and a forward. Is it a case, and this is kind of my view, is that they're creating the chances, so the creativity isn't necessarily the problem. The problem comes with finishing the chances. So either you need a goal scoring midfielder, and you need a goal scorer to come in and replace Callum Wilson, replace Alexander Isak. If you were given the choice of only signing one, so goal scorer midfielder or goal scorer, that's it. What would you be picking?
Goal scoring midfielder without question. I know that you've been, very keen for them to add another attacker. I'm sure those, feelings have already grown since Wood's exit. But I think, take Miggy's goals out of it, take Wilson and Isak's goals out of it. Bruno, Willock and Longstaff this season aren't chipping in with enough goals. And, Joel and as well, you could argue there needs to be more goals from further back in the pitch. And for me, Wilson and Isak will find their form again. We know that they're clinical when they're, having good runs of form. What we need is, the players behind them to start scoring again. So if Newcastle can go out and bring a goal scoring 10 or a goal scoring centre midfielder, I think that would be, my preference at this stage in the window. But we know they're working on, a couple of deals to try and get a couple over the line in the last couple of days of this window.
Could Anthony Gordon be that man, do you think?
Is he the man to score goals? Probably not, given his records. I'd also be very, very not concerned, but I would be a little bit apprehensive about him coming in at the stage of the window, given that he's bang out a favourite Everton, hasn't played for them since Boxing Day, didn't even make it off the bench on Saturday. I know that Lampard was very, very frosty in his reaction when asked about him. He is one who I don't think he splits opinion on social media. I think the majority of that opinion on social media is that Newcastle fans don't want to sign him, maybe because of his temperament and his actions on the field. And for me, he's 21. There's undoubtedly a talented player in there, but is he the man to save Newcastle's goal drought? I don't think he is.
It's interesting, the opinion on social media, because like you say, I don't think it's split. I think it's very much one way. People do not like Anthony Gordon, but he's clearly a talented player. Newcastle have looked at him on more than one occasion and they seem to like what they see. And I also look at some of Newcastle's players though, that they've currently got, the likes of Callum Wilson, the likes of Fabian Schär. If they were not on this Newcastle United side, I think people watching this, people listening to this would not like them one little bit, because they like to wind up the opposition. They like to talk a little bit too much and get in the ear of the opposition. They like to be physical, and they like to niggle at the ankles and what have you. And when it's on your side, it's absolutely brilliant. You love it. So I think, if Anthony Gordon was the man to come into Newcastle, and Eddie Howe was asked about the speculation today, and he said no comment on any of the players. But if he was the man that came in, any issues with his temperament on the pitch, I think would quickly disappear, and the fans would definitely be backing him.
Yeah, I agree completely. It is, as you say, the type of player that you'd love to have in your team, especially as we keep calling it Newcastle's new game management, and I think Gordon would fit into that perfectly well, given that he does like to buy a foul here and there. And look, people who, as we say, we've seen plenty on social media, people saying how much they don't want to sign Gordon, and there's a few people that make the very good point in the replies that Craig Bellamy probably wasn't very liked when he joined. The likes of David Batty probably weren't very liked when they joined, and they're going to become favourites among the fans. So I've got no problem with Gordon's temperament. That's not why I'm saying I don't think Newcastle should go out and sign him. I just don't think at this stage, where they need to be in a top four push, he's the man, talent or form-wise, that drags them to a top four this season.
I mean, we've got plenty of people in the comments, and you guys watching live, I want you to answer this question that I'm going to ask Aaron, but you guys watching live, I want to see you get into the comments and answer it as well. So we have Les here saying, please note Anthony Gordon, surely we can do better. But Aaron, when you look at the context, the world knows Newcastle needs a midfield addition. They know they've got a little bit of money to spend, and you're joining transfer window. Teams aren't really likely to let their stars go unless it's for quite a bit of cash. Realistically, who is out there? I mean, if it's not Anthony Gordon, who is out there?
It's a tricky question. It looks like Dan Juma is going to Everton. That's a deal that I thought Newcastle would go for, given his history with Howe. Elsewhere, you may be looking at someone with a bit more experience from Chelsea, someone like Ziyech, or maybe Conor Gallagher, who can play in a number of positions. You maybe then looking at Leicester. If you want to go score midfielder, you need to look no further than Yuri Tielemans, James Maddison. I know that those two players are probably two that are going to be too expensive for Newcastle at this moment in time, but I just think there is probably better options out there. And I think Everton, they were very, very keen to hike the price up in the summer. They're now engulfed in a relegation battle, and the club's in turmoil. Yes, Anthony Gordon isn't playing, but I'm think they're still going to demand at least 30 million from him. So, look, who knows? It's going to be a very, very busy week. As Eddie Howe, told the media this morning, the club are working very hard behind the scenes to try and get one or two over the line. And I'm sure, even though it's a small pool, they'll have some very, very decent options in the mix.
So Mark Fullerton says Maddison and Ziyech for him. Derek wants Newcastle to push the boat out and go and get Diaby from Bayer Leverkusen. Roger would like Tielemans, but aside from that, he says he's not too sure who else is out there. Billy would like Maddison or Tielemans. We've got John, Tielemans, Maddison. To kind of phrase, you guessed it, Maddison. So Maddison clearly the one, and he played 20 minutes for Leicester, didn't he, over the weekend? So working back from injury. We've got another shout here for Conor Gallagher. It's going to be really interesting, and not many people, it seems, at least watching this live, in favour of a potential Anthony Gordon arrival. Craig says he's a real talent. Just look at how direct he is, good vision, and can finish. Dan Ashworth knows him well, with him being in the England 21. So I'm assuming that he is talking about Gordon. So at least we've got seem to have one voice. And Chris says, bring back Billy Whitehurst. For our younger listeners and viewers, go and Google that and you'll see what Chris means by that. He a proper little wind-up merchant, shall we say, there, with all due respect to Billy. So go and have a little Google of that if you don't recognise that name. Aaron, we've got other names linked that we haven't mentioned, the likes of Ruben Neves. We've seen Verstender, looks like he's off to either Arsenal or Dortmund. That's the fullback from La Liga. Newcastle, the January window last year seemed to work so well for Newcastle. They seemed to get what they wanted, and even when they didn't, they went out and had plan B, plan C. It seems to be a little more difficult this time around. Is that because they're further up the league? So teams maybe like Chelsea, whereas last year they may have loaned them Conor Gallagher, they may have loaned them Loftus-Cheek. This year they're not going to do that because that could directly impact their chance of getting in the top four.
Yeah, Eddie Howe made quite a public point about this after the summer window, where he came out in September and said that clubs were quite unwilling to do business with Newcastle, and that was when they were essentially a mid-table team. Now that they're actually on their way to disrupting the Big Six, I think the chances of nabbing players off the likes of Chelsea and Liverpool and Manchester United becomes very, very difficult now. They don't by any means want to aid Newcastle push up the table, which maybe means that they do need to go to Leicester and Everton, teams that aren't going to be anywhere near that sort of top 6 or top 8 this season. But undoubtedly, Newcastle United, I don't think any team wants to give them any more ammunition than they've got already, which is going to be something that the board overcome, and I'm sure they'll have plans in place to counteract the resistance they probably are going to experience from teams around them in the league.
Eddie Howe was asked about transfers, of course, in today's press conference, and he said, from my side, I shift my focus from one thing to another. It's one of my strengths. My first priority is always the games and the players we have here. They're always my priority. So training games and making sure we don't take any shortcuts. And he also said, the quote I was looking for was that we were trying. I had it there, but I've totally lost it. That seems to have disappeared on my screen. But essentially what he said was the club was trying to move in the transfer market. Aaron, sitting here right now, if Newcastle were to end the window without any additions, would that be a terrible thing?
Yeah, I think it would, purely because of how light they look in certain positions. I think before this window started, you looked at the team, Shelvey's injury made it vital that they got another midfield body in. You would, again, in an ideal world, like maybe one or two defensive additions just purely for cover. I mean, as we've said, Trippier going down would be, or getting injured would be a real blow for them. But Chris Wood's exit means it's absolutely crucial that they definitely get one or two in now, because should anything happen to Wilson or Isak, you're really, really looking stretched in that attacking department. And there's actually been a question that I've been meaning to ask you, because you've been really, really keen for Newcastle to sign another attacker, and that was when Chris Wood was at the club. Do you now think they need two?
In an ideal world, yes, but this is not an ideal world, so they're not going to get two. They certainly need one, and if they were to finish the window without bringing someone in, I think that could potentially be a disaster, because we've seen, even with a fit Callum Wilson and a fit Isak, and I know they're not match fit, but they are fit, the form's not there. And without goals, you don't win games, do you? And clearly Newcastle are struggling for them at the moment. So, but he's got nothing. He's got nothing to change it with. Like, heaven forbid one of them gets injured, then he's left with one strike. And he clearly knows that's the situation, because he's mentioned it, hasn't he, over the last week, that it would leave them dreadfully short. They've got to go out and get a striker. I found that quote, actually, Aaron, from Eddie Howe about transfers. The club are trying. That's where we are. There's no positive news to give you, but certainly there's a lot of work going on, so it's good to hear that. It's going to be a busy finish to busy 7-8 days, isn't it? I think the issue with the striker though is you had Chris Wood, who wasn't scoring goals, but he offered something a little bit different. And while the goals were lacking, great attitude, fantastic professional, fitted into that dressing room really well. Now what you've got is Newcastle needing a striker. You're in the January window, so you have a premium to pay in the window. You probably have a Newcastle tax as well, because everyone thinks they've got an endless amount of cash, which isn't necessarily the case, but that's the assumption. And it's not going to be easy to get your first choice, And I do wonder where that leaves Newcastle, because what do you do? Do you sacrifice bringing someone in who's got a brilliant attitude for bringing in someone with a bit of a not so good attitude, but will score your goals, which could happen if you have to drop to C, D, E in the list? It's a really difficult challenge for Newcastle, I think, to get someone who might be able just to slip straight into this squad and the unison that we see in the dressing room.
Yeah, and one thing that you haven't mentioned that stands out for me is that any player coming into this team in January to replace Chris Wood probably knows that they're going to be third choice, unless they go out and literally spend another 60 million on a striker, which they're not going to do. Someone's going to have to come in and know that they're behind Wilson and Isak. With that being said, do they then go for someone young who is, happy to, just be another body in the squad, just, to add cover? They know that they're going to be there for the long term.
But do they? I mean, do they need to? And I know we've had this discussion prior, but just thinking about over this weekend, do they need to be sold, or you will be third choice? I'm not sure, because I think if you're a striker who is at senior level, you're a Premier League striker, maybe, I don't know, I haven't got a name on my top of my head, but let's say whoever, you've got 9-10 goals this season, you would fancy a move to Newcastle. If you look at the way Callum Wilson and Isak are playing at the moment, if you've been playing week in, week out, you're going to come in and you're going to be ahead of them in terms of the match fitness. Because you could slip straight in there, given Callum Wilson's out of form, given Isak's not fit match. You don't think? You don't think that would happen?
No, I completely agree with what you're saying, and I don't think anyone would be sold the pitch of you're going to come in and be third choice. But I just think the type of player that they're going to go for, I don't think that Eddie Howe and Dan Ashworth think that they need to go out and sign a striker that is going to replace Isak or Wilson in the pecking order, if that makes sense.
What did you make, though, of his comments, though? Because he did say, didn't he, last week, that he wanted someone to come in and basically, I'm paraphrasing here, but basically hit the ground running. That's what he said. He wanted someone to come in who can just play straight away. So that would suggest it would be someone who has Premier League experience. Like could have been a Danny Ings, for example. That maybe would have fitted it perfectly, but obviously he's off to West Ham. But it does suggest that he wants someone that can challenge and can displace the two.
Yeah, no, I do get that, and I completely agree with what you're saying. But I just think for me, it just seems odd to think that Wilson or Isak could be demoted to us. And I know this is a pecking order that we're talking about, and I'm sure Eddie Howe doesn't see it as this sort of list order that we're talking about. But to see Wilson or Isak drop down to sort of third choice, it just doesn't seem like a move that the club will make in my eyes. And I think they went from having a really good thing of Isak, Wilson, Wood. Yes, Wood maybe wasn't bringing the goals in, but he was a fantastic leader in the dressing room. And he knew he was, third choice. And now they've got a real struggle on their hands to find someone who, yes, can come in and hit the ground running, potentially be a leader in the dressing room, get on with the squad, know the way they're playing, potentially settle for not playing as much. It's a huge task for them to find someone in the final days. And I just think Wood's exits really, really complicated things. I think one thing I will say is that, Ashworth was really clear in a recent interview that he gave that, signing players for the here and now was what he said was unsustainable. Really, really sort of laying it on thick that they were going to really push for more players like Garang Kuwal, who, young and have massive potential, but maybe on at first team level. Yeah, I don't know whether that'll change now Wood's gone, but I think certainly that's what they've been trying to do this month, is find players for the future rather than just, to come in and do a job right now.
Now, I asked John Gibson this in last week's episode. If you, Aaron, could pick one realistic striker to come in, there's no qualms about fees, contracts, wages. You pick him, he signs, he's in the squad. Who would it be?
If you'd have asked me a week ago, I would have probably said Danny Ings. As you've mentioned, I think Newcastle have maybe missed a trick, and maybe his move happened, or Wood's move happened a couple of days too late. In that respect, elsewhere, it's hard. It's hard because I think the thing is, Isak came in 60 million in the summer, huge outlay. Everybody, was so excited. And because he hasn't hit the heights, I mean, you've been talking obviously about it for a month about how they need another striker. And really, we're all just waiting for Isak to kick in. And it sort of takes the pressure off needing another striker. So if I'm honest, I don't know. I
think
don't know.
I think the kind of phrase misunderstood the task there. I said realistic. Fortunately, I don't think Rashford's going to leave Manchester United, but I do agree with you. He's playing very, very well. We've got Derek saying here he thinks Newcastle are waiting until everyone else has blown their pot of money. I mean, they're waiting to the last 8 days. But I do think in general, I thought the Danny Ings move actually would be the domino that falls and everything follows. Hasn't quite happened, but I think we will see this week, maybe towards the end of this week, things just start to move across the Premier League, and that then just sets everything away, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And look, how and Ashworth have both said that we're in no rush this month to make deals, and they were going to sit and buy their time. And maybe biding it just a little bit too long for my liking. I'm starting to get a little bit twitchy, knowing that we're sort of entering the last 7 or 8 days. But look, their track record since they came in has been near enough faultless. So you back them to find the right players that Howe needs for the short and the long term.
The drilling's returned, but it appears to be outside the window now.
See, I told you jinxed it. You should have just kept quiet about it.
At least it's not under me seat, and I'm not trying just to stay still instead of being, rocked and vibrated across the room. But alas, what about the loan market? Do you think the hold up with transfers this month is it to do with financial fair play? Newcastle don't want to spend too much because that hurts what they can spend in the summer. Is it there's no one out there and they're finding it quite difficult, or is it kind of a mixture of things? I mean, how important is that loan market, do you think, to what could happen in the next 8 days or so?
I think it's a mixture of a few points. I think, you've got to remember they've spent 200 million. There isn't an endless pot of money there at this moment in time without them, getting major sponsorship deals over the line. I think, Amanda Staveley's been very, very clear when she's spoken publicly that they want to try and make this a sustained growth. I don't think we're going to see 100 million, spends every, 6 months or a year. So absolutely they should be trying to take advantage of the low market. And I think where they are right now, and as the conversation we've just had in the last 5 minutes, it makes perfect sense that actually you could get someone in who's going to do a job on the sidelines for 6 months, and then you make a decision about them in the future, or you look elsewhere in the summer. So absolutely, I wouldn't mind them going at the low market at all.
But isn't that the point? And we referenced it earlier in the show. So Les is going to make another point here. Going to make the point again. She can't see anyone in the Premier League loaning to us. And again, it goes back to the point Lee Ryder made actually in last week's episode, and the one I made at the start of this episode, that last season, yeah, why wouldn't Chelsea loan us Conor Gallagher? Why wouldn't Chelsea loan us Ziyech? Why would Manchester City loan us one of their, players in the background? But this time around, they do that, and it could knock them out of the top 4. So the players that you would want to bring on loan, it's not as easy as it was last season.
Yeah,
Newcastle essentially victims of their own success in many ways.
Yeah, 100% they are. And if they thought they found it tough in the summer when really they weren't actually that too much of an immediate threat, they're going to find it a lot harder this month, as I'm sure they're finding it right now in negotiations. As I said, you probably need to look further down the table. I'm sure that Newcastle could, put together quite an attractive financial loan. There's loan fees these days, and they'll take a big chunk of people's wages. Potentially an obligation or an option to buy in the summer. That makes it a little bit more attractive. But I do completely agree that the likes of Liverpool and Manchester City and Spurs and Manchester United loaning us any top talent is very, very slim this month.
I don't think anyone's worried about Liverpool, though. We're not bothered about just qualifying for the top 10. I know. I'm talking about European football, Aaron. I'm not bothered about Liverpool. The point against Palace saw Newcastle set a new unbeaten record, 15 unbeaten, fantastic. Another clean sheet for Nick Pope. That was 50. He got more clean sheets than he's conceded goals. So 12 clean sheets, 11 goals conceded, fantastic. I know you wanted to talk about this. We've held off a little bit, but I'm going to open the floor. Talk to me about that save that Nick Pope made then.
Oh, honestly, right? Just how can he have nothing to do and he's still able to pull that save off? And I just think, Newcastle's defence switched off for a split second and he's just there. And I know we say it every week, but you just can't get over the fact they signed this player for £10 million. Good to see Gareth Southgate in the stands at Selhurst Park. Is he finally going to do the right thing and drop Jordan Pickford for Nick Pope? I mean, I wouldn't put too much money on that, but just fantastic to see it. An amazing save. Gets better every time you watch it, and I'm just delighted for him personally. That he's absolutely thriving at Newcastle United.
How many times have you watched it on repeat?
Well, I reckon we're in double figures now, probably.
Look at that. I mean, it was a fantastic save. Great reactions, and like you say, to have nothing to do all game. But we see that consistently every single week. Whether it's him having to rush out and just clear a ball, whether it's him in the dying moments having just to jump up and collect it and fall at the ground. You've all got to be switched on, and it's a challenge. Mentally more than anything, to be ready when you are called upon. When for the every other minute in the game, you're pretty much just sitting on your backside doing nothing.
Yeah, 100%. And look, I think not just Pope, but the entire back five are just playing with this absolutely, incredible confidence that they can just, probably get away with things that they couldn't on a normal run of form. So, clearly he's loving his football. Clearly the back five are absolutely loving playing together. And I thought they were, again, fantastic on Saturday. Hawley put a foot wrong and made life very, very difficult for Palace. It's just trying to find, a little bit more in midfield and attack in the next coming games to try and keep this run going.
Most certainly, but another clean sheet, fantastic. Just a fantastic defensive unit, absolutely brilliant. Southampton tomorrow then in the Cup. First leg down at St Mary's. 3,000 Newcastle United fans down there. Thousands more who I'm sure would have liked to have been there. Thousands of more fans who I'm sure would like to have got a ticket to the second leg, but it appeared to sell out within the hour of it going on sale to members, which is unbelievable. The game tomorrow, I feel a little bit strange about it. I'm excited in one way, but I'm a little bit apprehensive because I just expect Newcastle United to win this game, and I don't like that feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if I'm honest, I'm a bit hesitant. I just think, and how touched on this morning in the press conference, you don't really know which Southampton you're going to get at the minute. They did fantastically well to beat Manchester City in the last round. They did very, very well to then win in the Premier League last week. And then, they've sort of had a little bit of a setback. Nathan Jones still trying to find his feet after, quite a tricky start down there. If, the Newcastle of the first half of the season show up and they remember to bring their boots on the bus with them, I think they cruise through. If not, then it's a little bit difficult. And I know Howe was trying to play this down this morning, but that second leg at St James's Park is so crucial because, tomorrow night will be very, very good, but you feel like next week will be something special with so much riding on it. So hopefully over the two legs, you'd fancy them to get the job done. But as I say, you can't be as confident as I think a lot of people were when the draw first came out.
Southampton are a very weird side. They've got a lot of good players who I think wouldn't go amiss in a top six side. I think a lot of talented players. If we're talking about a striker, and I know people listening to this and watching this will go, "Are you crazy, Andrew?" But Che Adams could do you a job until the point when you are Man City and you then need to go out and buy a Haaland. You know what I mean? He can score goals, and he's a good player. James Ward-Prowse, a massive fan of him. I'm already setting up the fan club in hope rather than expectation, because I think he's just absolutely brilliant. And they have got quality players. It just whatever, they seem to be very up and down under Hazelhutton and then under Nathan Jones now. but I love watching his press conferences. I mean, if you haven't yet watched one of Jones's press conferences, right, go and find them, because he just seems to be angry all the time. Like, just always seems to be really angry. It's really
Yeah,
entertaining to watch.
he does seem to be a bit of an enigma. Clearly very, very highly rated after what he did at Luton. I know he left Luton a bit prematurely and struggled and went back to them. And, you know, he got off to a really, really bad start against Southampton. It looked like he was going to be one of those managers that lasts about 7 games. You know, it was sort of Frank de Boer-esque at the start, I thought, when everything was going wrong. But, you know, he's sort of steadied the ship of late. They've had some decent performances, you know, quite unlucky not to get someone from Villa on Saturday. And, you know, St Mary's will be up for it. I think the chance for them to get to a final as well. I know they haven't had to wait as long as Newcastle, but promises to be a really good game. As you say, they've got some fantastic players. I know we've mentioned Adams and Ward-Prowse, but, you know, you look at that Dozie that they've got down the right, who's a really, really promising talent for the future. You know, Lavia, who they got from Man City in the middle, another who can cause problems. So it isn't going to be easy, but as I say, over 2 legs that night at St James's Park next week, you know, on deadline day when hopefully they've announced a couple of signings, it promises to be very, very, very special.
And it's just funny, isn't it, that you're going to make your return to the press box for that game as well.
Look, I mean, it's just
falling nicely for you, hasn't it?
fortunate timing. What can I say, really? My leg's suddenly feeling better.
I mean, how did Newcastle approach Tuesday then, tomorrow night? How do they do it? Do they go down with the mindset of, look, we're like, it sounds a daft question, is it? Because you go down with the mindset of winning, but some managers go down there with different approaches. You know, we'll go for a draw, if we get a win, fantastic. But with the game being at home, the final leg, that's where we aim to win. Do you go down and aim to get as many goals as possible? Do you go down to get 1 goal and sit back and just hope you win 1-0? What do you do? What does Eddie Howe do?
I think it's a bit of a balance. I think he'll want his players on, you know, after the run they've been on, to get back in the, you know, the habit of scoring goals. But I think what's most important is, you know, you keep it steady at the back and you don't throw a caution at the wind and go gung-ho and, you know, ruin your chance before you've even got back to St James's Park. I think if they can take even a draw back to St James's Park, or even, you know, a 1-goal deficit, I think Newcastle would fancy themselves to overturn it. I think tomorrow is just all about making sure that they don't blow it.
You see, you're the second person to say that. John Gibson said that on last week's episode, and I'm sitting here thinking, no, let's not even talk about a 1-goal deficit.
Look, I'm not saying that I think Newcastle are going to lose by a goal tomorrow night, but I'm just saying if they do, I think that it's not the end of the world. And look, I would love Newcastle, but so are you saying that what they should do is go absolutely gung-ho tomorrow and try and smash them 3-0?
Not gung-ho, but I think the way we've seen Eddie Howe, and again, it's a different kind of format, isn't it? But he wants to win every game, and he'll be confident that his players can go down there and score 2 or 3 goals. Well, maybe not based on recent weeks, so they can't seem to find the net. But, you know, the Leicester game, for example, you know, he'll be confident his players can do the job. And I think if you ended up losing 1-0 at St Mary's, heading into that game at St James's Park with the mindset, oh, well, this is where we can turn it around, and then you lose, you'd be kicking yourself. And you'd be absolutely kicking yourself. You go down there tomorrow looking to win by as many goals as you can. Yes, the game and how you approach it after you've scored 1 or 2 will change, bearing in mind how it's going. But none of this talk about a 1-0 deficit. No, I'm not having that.
Can I just say for the record that I don't think Newcastle are going to play to only be a goal down. I'm just saying anything worse than that is really bad news, but I think it's manageable if they lose. I think going into the game, Eddie Howe will set up as he's set up for pretty much the entire season. I don't think there'll be any change. You know, our colleague Kieran Kelly asked him this morning specifically, will there be any long speeches and, you know, big words of wisdom before? And Howe was like, no, it'll just be, you know, what we've worked on for the last couple of months, and there'll be no sort of difference in this game than any other, which is the way it should be, because, you know, we saw Newcastle and what they could do to Southampton on the road earlier this season. So I'm not saying they're going to lose, but when we're sat here on Saturday or Monday or whenever we're next to the pod talking about them being 1 goal down, I'll just come back and say, well, it's not the end of the world, because they can turn it around.
Stop it. What are you doing, man? They're 1-0 down. All our listeners and viewers are coming for you, man. How are we?
Okay, well, I don't think that's going to happen. So I'll take that responsibility on my shoulders. But I'm just saying, as long as Newcastle United win, draw, or only lose by a goal tomorrow, that's all I'm saying. Then it's an okay night.
I hope we've got a nice pillow on that fence that you're sitting on, mate. Peter says the goals have got to come, so why not tomorrow night? Exactly, Peter. Let's give a bit of this positivity to young Aaron there. Don't be so negative, says Fred. We have to go down Southampton for the win. Yes, positivity. That's what we like, because you know Eddie Howe is going down for the win, most certainly. And to coin a phrase, makes an excellent point here. Team has to score past us for us to be one goal down, and we know Newcastle's defence at the moment absolutely fantastic.
Very
You've
true.
already mentioned it previously in the episode, Aaron. No changes for you. It's going to be the same starting 11 as we saw against Palace.
If you ask me now what the team's going to be, I think he plays the same team that he played at Palace. I wouldn't be totally against Isak coming in for Wilson. I wouldn't totally be against Maxi coming in, but I just don't think in my heart of hearts that he will change it. And look, I might be wrong, and that's fine. But I think, given what he's done of late, I think he probably picks the same team that he's picked.
Long term, does that become an issue perhaps if Newcastle don't start scoring goals? Because we saw this time last year when he first came in, he was sticking with the same team and wasn't really working, but eventually got the results. But sometimes you've got to change up if it's not working. Hopefully tomorrow they win by 7 or 8 goals and everyone's scoring for fun. But do you think his Eddie Howe's, I don't want to use I'm going to use the word reliance on that starting 11. Granted, he hasn't got too many options as it is. If things don't start turning around again, it's probably the wrong phrase, but you get what I mean. Does it become an issue because he's not too keen on switching things up?
Maybe, but I think should this run continue where the struggle for goals, I think, the calls would become too loud for him. Even Howe, who's very, very sort of shuts out the noise, I think the calls would become too loud. And I think Howe himself knows that when it's not working, he can change it. I think the fact that we've just seen him change it so little recently is because of how well the form has been. And I think, when push comes to shove and he needs to make changes, he will. I just don't think tomorrow is the night he does it. He doesn't like to take risks, and it would be, admittedly, I know they haven't been firing on all cylinders recently, but it would still be a little bit of a gamble to change this team that have, been defensively very solid and not lost a game. So look, I don't envy the decision. I think he has got options if he wants to make them, and time will tell. It depends, how well everyone's came through that game on Saturday as well, I suppose.
Frederick says he really thinks Isaac will start. Well, I think that's probably one of the only changes I could see happening, really. I think taking Wilson out of the firing line and just doing that, it takes a lot off his shoulders. And then come the second leg, he's fresh in the mind, he's fresh in the legs. And you might just see a totally different Callum Wilson. That's the remedy.
Yeah, definitely. And we haven't really seen too much of Wilson off the bench and, being that sort of difference maker. So it'd be interesting to see how he actually copes with that when, he's tasked to come on for the last 20, 25 minutes as Maxi and Isak so often are. So big decision to make. I think if there was to be any changes made, that's probably the change he makes up front. But I think elsewhere on the team, it's far too settled for him to be changing it for a semi-final.
And Peter says 3-0 tomorrow, done and dusted. So there we go. Just a quick word on potential exits then, transfer window wise. He's been quite clear how doesn't say anything happening over the next few days because of the cup competition. Carl Darrow linked away. Shelby said he was surprised Shelby's been linked away. Ryan Fraser's another one. Do you think it's going to be one move and then everything starts to happen in the next few days?
Yeah, I mean, we saw it in the summer, wasn't there? There was a lot of Newcastle exits in the final 24 hours and late loan deals get sorted very, very late on. As of, what he was asked about today, as you've mentioned, Carl Darlow won't be going in the next couple of days, despite, really significant interest from the Championship for him. Hull very keen to sign him. Huddersfield very keen as well, given that they've both got injuries, but of course with Dubravka being cup tied, Darlow won't be going for the semi. Shelby, there was a very, very weird link that he was suddenly, off to Besiktas earlier this week. How rubbish that this morning. Says he doesn't know where the speculation came from. Ryan Fraser's a bit difficult because, you know, he hasn't made a match day. He hasn't made a league squad, I think, since Boxing Day. He hasn't featured at all since October. The writing, you know, has looked on the wall for him for a while. I know there's a couple of teams that are after him, but Howe today said that, you know, he needs to just keep working and getting his way back in the team. But it's difficult to see him having a future. I think he is probably one that goes in the final days. But yeah, we probably aren't going to see anything in the next couple of days at least.
And obviously the second leg falls on transfer deadline day. I was going to ask you whether you think someone will be in by that point, but bear in mind, yeah, the answers to previous sort of questions in this episode, there has to be someone in, doesn't there?
You would hope so. I mean, as we touched on, I think it would be a bit of a disaster not to get anybody over the line, especially now that they've lost, you know, quite a critical body in the last week or so. But I think, you know, it does. Howe insists, as he always does, that he's focused on the team, and you know, the team and the games are his priority, and you know, any transfers are sort of in the back of his mind. But with two huge games in the next week and a deadline day, you know, coming up, it does put a little bit of pressure to get deals over the line. But I think they will. I know they said they were going to bide their time, but I'd be very, very surprised if they don't add it, you know, one or two in the last final days.
Fred Hurst says, I really hope we go for Madison, as he will make a huge impact on the quality of our squad. Yeah, I think players are coming. Obviously, that second leg falls on transfer deadline day, which is going to be a wonderful 17, 18 hour, 19-hour shift for us. But we're happy to do it when it's all positive, isn't it? Because I'd much rather be doing it under this ownership than the last ownership. And I had a question then. It's totally escaped my mind. Totally forgotten what it was. So what I'll do, because I'll no doubt remember it in a second, give me your score prediction for the first leg.
1-0 Southampton. No, I'm only joking. I'll go 1-0 Newcastle. I think they'll steal it later on.
Goodness me. I know that was
Saw
jovial,
your
but
face drop there when I made that comment.
goodness me, we'll be getting some negative reviews on this podcast after that. No, Newcastle, I think we'll win tomorrow.
Yeah,
They're going to win.
I'm going for 1-0 Newcastle.
They're going to win. And yeah, they're going to set up a good leg, a good tie at Newcastle. It's a James Park sellout stadium, scarves, flags. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. So, but I do think they will win tomorrow. And Derek says Aaron's trying to get cancelled today. So on that happy note, we might leave that there. Head over to chroniclelive.co.uk where you can keep up to date with all the latest Newcastle United news, including our dedicated Transfer Live blog. All Eddie Howe had to say in the build-up to tomorrow's EFL Cup semi-final first leg. We've got newsletters you can subscribe to, and if you listen on the podcast, hit that follow button. Also got a live event this Thursday, so if you're lucky enough to have had a ticket, they're nearly in as much demand as a Newcastle United match day ticket. We look forward to seeing you in person. Aaron will be there with or without crutches.
I think at the moment it's with crutches, but we'll see how I feel on the day.
There we go. And we'll just finish off there with Fred's prediction. 2-0 Newcastle United against Southampton. Isak and Willock to score. Well, this has been the Everything is Black and White podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in, and do enjoy the rest of your Monday.